Thank you all so much for coming out tonight for our program, a conversation between the artists Bisa Butler and Basil Kincaid. I'm Misa Jeffereis. I'm Associate Curator here at CAM, and I'm serving as your moderator this evening. I'm so honored to be joined by our two esteemed speakers, and I must give absolute due credit to Basil, whose idea it was to be in conversation with Bisa. Basil had mentioned that both of them had actually participated in a survey exhibition last year at the Smithsonian's Renwick Gallery called This Present Moment. And so Basil thought it would be really wonderful to engage with Bisa directly. I think we'll see over the next hour just how connected and interrelated their practices are and where there is divergence and expansion. So thank you, Basil, for this brilliant idea. And many, many thanks to Bisa for coming to St. Louis to speak with us. So please join me in welcoming our guests. We are also here on the occasion of the Great Rivers Biennial, which is a long-standing awards program for St. Louis-based artists made possible by Gateway Foundation. Basil is one of 3 artists selected for the award alongside Saj Issa and Ronald Young, and the award includes both financial support and an exhibition at the museum, which is currently on view. We are so pleased with the exhibition and with Basil's stunning presentation of exuberant, large-scale quilts and embroideries made in the past year, some of which represent a new direction in his practice. And just a quick note that actually tonight's program was originally scheduled on our October 1st Friday, and to say that we are focusing on each GRB artist during a First Friday this season. So Ronald Young's First Friday is on Friday. Ron's in the house here too. And then Saj Issa's First Friday will be on February 7th, so I hope you can join us for those. And before I get into the bios for our presenters, I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of our program. So after I finish my intro, I'm going to invite Bisa and Basil to present for about 5 minutes on their practice, give us a little grounding. We'll then have a conversation for about 30 minutes before we open it up to audience questions, and we should be wrapped up right around the hour mark. Okay, so with that, Bisa Butler lives in South Orange, New Jersey, and has a studio in Jersey City. Bisa earned her BFA in painting at Howard University and holds an MAT in teaching art from Montclair State University. Her work has been exhibited widely, both domestically and internationally. Bisa was named an honorary doctorate of letters from Bloomfield College and recently received the inaugural Faith in the Arts Award. In 2020, Bisa had her first institutional solo exhibition at the Art Institute of Chicago. Her work can be found in that museum's permanent collection, as well as the Museum of Fine Arts Boston and Perez Art Museum, Miami. The World Is Yours, Butler's first solo exhibition with Jeffrey Deitch last year, was enthusiastically received and attracted thousands of visitors. Basil Kincaid is based in St. Louis and in Claygon, Ghana, and works across quilting, drawing, collage, photography, installation, and performance. Basil received a BA in drawing and painting at Colorado College, and he has received fellowships from the Regional Arts Commission and United States Artists. Recent solo exhibitions include The New Bend at Hauser and Wirth, New York and Los Angeles, New African Portraiture at Kunsthalle Krems, Austria, All in One Feeling at Mindy Solomon Gallery, Miami, Dancing the Windwalk, a semi-permanent fabric monument during Frieze LA in 2023 with support from Art Production Fund, and a ceremonial installation at Laumeier Sculpture Park, among others. Basil's work is in the collection of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Please join me in welcoming them again. Thank you. So with that, I would love to turn it over to you, Bisa, to give a little bit of grounding on your practice, and I will flip through the slides for you, if that helps.
Is it on? Hi, everyone. I wanted to talk to you briefly, talking to Misa. This is my first visit out to St. Louis to support my good friend Basil. Congrats to you. I'm so happy to be here. And for those of you who don't know my work or know me, I'm just like giving a small snapshot. I was born in New Jersey. in the 1970s, but I start my story with this photo of my grandparents because they are the ones who came before me and had a really great influence on my life. My grandmother Violet and my grandfather Francis, who you see here. That photo, the sepia tone one, was taken like in a little photo booth in the 1930s in Louisiana. They were both graduates of Xavier University. Any Xavier in the house? Any New Orleans folks in the house? No Creoles, no gumbo.
Oh, here's one. We got one.
Okay. Okay. And my grandmother's name was Violet. So you see the purple flowers that I used on this piece. This is my very first piece that I made in school while I was studying for my master's. And my professor said, you can make a final project for fiber arts class. And I thought, okay, I'll make a portrait. And this was the portrait that I came up with. And then I'm going to skip ahead to, actually, I'm going a little bit behind. I started out at Howard University. HU in the house. I know my Howard sisters in the house. We just had our homecoming last weekend. Howard is a historically black college in Washington, D.C. And our esteemed vice president also graduated from Howard University. And this piece is an example of those who came before me, again, influence. On one side, you'll see Lois Jones, Ubi girl from the Thai region from the 70s. Lois Jones was a graduate of Howard University. She was highly influential. I studied her work while I was in school. She wasn't teaching there, but she was working professionally. She was in her elder years. And then on the other side is my copy. And a lot of times, as you know, in art school, when people start first drawing, they always copy because you're trying to learn from the masters. I wanted to know how and why did Lois use these bright, intense colors and what they meant to her. Both of these are images of young women who are going through a transitional period from turning from a child to a woman. But on my piece, I chose an image of a young woman who had undergone a female genital mutilation, or FGM, because that is something that is done in northern Ghana and I learned while making this was done to my own grandmother. And then I chose this picture to show whence I came. This is the influence of my professor at Howard, Al Smith. I was always painting and I was struggling to express myself. Every art student, me and Basil talked about that. We all think that we should paint. And he said, why are you not using fabric? You love bright colors, you love cloth. And then I started gluing cloth onto a board. So this was a self-portrait that I did at that time. And then this is one of my early quilts as well, where I started thinking about why are you making this artwork? What does it mean to you? I never saw a photo of my grandfather on my father's side. My father's from Ghana, West Africa. My mother's from New Orleans, Louisiana. And I imagined what my grandfather may have looked like. He died from appendicitis in the early 1940s in Ghana. If you were to get appendicitis in the wrong place at the wrong time, that was a death sentence. And I used scraps of my father's dashikis because I couldn't afford fabric. And those were the clothes that he had left over from his youth that were like in a bin in the basement. And at that time, then I started realizing that I was creating a vernacular because those are his fabrics and things that he touched. So that's as close as I was going to get to this grandfather who I never met, is to use fabric with the DNA on it from his son to create an imagined portrait. And I just included this picture because this is a traditional home of people in the Baku region. This is where I'm from. And this is how the women would decorate the outside of their homes. Each pattern means something. It signifies something about an attribute or protection that the woman wants to have for herself. And this is carried on, I believe, through me and my work. And I chose this image so you could see again that relationship. I think I should I think that's enough, right? I'd like to.
I could listen to you talk all night.
No, let's cut it.
Okay, yeah, this is fine. That's all right. We can share. And then I think it's important to hold those patterns in mind because a lot of my work goes into these conversation around genetic memory and how, some of this creative information is passed down in a form of, biological inheritance. And so when you look at, maybe if you skip ahead to that red quilt, you can see some of those same patterns repeated instinctually in the work. But I'll talk briefly about my work here, and if you want to learn more about my backstory, we can go into that separately. But for this body of work, I titled this body of work, I Come a Mighty Long Way. It is in part a reflection on my journey of quilt making over the last 8 years until now. And then, I didn't even know you were in St. Louis. Then, in part, also a projection into the type of work that I'll be making next. So the quilt works that are in there are a crystallization of my different explorations over the past 8 years. My quilts began with more abstract, aformist type, maybe like the foreground ground register where it's like 3-dimensional and all hand sewn like that. And then my mom actually inspired this technique, my narrative quilt making technique. We talk a lot, and she was like, have you ever, instead of making a collage out of paper, take 2 or 3 or 4 of your quilts and make a collage out of the quilts instead of paper? And that just shook me. I was like, I got to call you back, and that sent me down this rabbit hole that has kind of led to where we are now in my quilt making, where I'm like taking inspiration from all my other mediums and filtering it through the lens of the quilt. So when you look at them, it's traditional techniques, the layering, the hand stitching, the patterns or rejection of pattern, like just rhythmic piecing. And then I wanted to also emphasize this non-uniform shape, which was something I found in a lot of the early Black American quilt making that I studied. They weren't, the quilt kind of dictated its own shape through the nature of the piecing. And so I let a lot of these kind of, underground, undergirding themes that I've noticed throughout the history of quilt making in my family and within Black cultures and traditions, and then look at that hand in hand with West African textile traditions. And so you'll see the incorporation of like the hand woven kente. You'll see the influence of like Ghanaian wax block and other, fabrics from my experience in Ghana. And then now with my new work too, I'm starting to think a lot more environmentally as the scale of my practice and work grows. So a lot of the material is secondhand, like bales of clothes that get shipped from the U.S. or Great Britain or Australia, things that, y'all took to Goodwill, or not necessarily Goodwill, but things that were thrown away or overstocked from stores. So these stores produce too many clothes, we'll find brand new stuff thrown away. So I'll buy those bales, we'll organize and wash and process the material, and then kind of looking at the global impact of textile industry on top of these personal and then also cultural techniques. Lastly, this piece that's in the background of this photo, the one that looks like 3 panels together, that piece is not a quilt. It is inspired by quilting, but it's a patchwork that I stretched like a painting. And so some of this stuff is reflecting also on my background in painting, but realizing in this similar way that you did that I feel more comfortable with the materials than with physical paint. And looking at like, what happens when you structure it in this way. It also allows you to have a moment of rest with the patchwork itself, whereas some of the other work is so maximal that your eyes can't really handle all the information at once, and so you start subconsciously abstracting parts of the image, which was intentional, but I want you to actually see with this other work the nature of the piecing before it gets manipulated.
Great. Thank you both so much for giving us that window into your practice. I have so many questions, but I think we should just start at the beginning. I would love for you to each just talk a little bit more about how you came to quilting as your particular material, since neither of you sort of started out that way. And I did want to I have some quotes from some of y'all from my research. And Bisa, you had said in, the making of these quilts that, I'm working with my hands and it's direct and it has a soothing property. The making of quilts is a healing process. So I'd love for you to also just talk about like the significance of what it means to work with these fabrics.
I think that I started using fabrics at the request of my professor. So shout out to all the educators, pushing your students to get beyond their comfort zone. And that was also right on time because I was pregnant with my first child, and the smell of the paint was making me sick. Carrying the paint box around, when you're newly pregnant, everything somehow is too heavy. The walking was too much, everything was too much. But I could handle fabrics. And after I got out of school, I started just working with fabric directly. And I do feel like it was a healing thing. It allowed me to be a mom and be an artist. I was very young, I was 20. And my husband was working. It was just me and the baby. My mother was young. She wasn't retired. I couldn't afford a babysitter. And I couldn't afford to put her in daycare either. Plus, I hadn't had a real job, so there was no job that I was taking a break from. I was fresh out of college with a new baby, trying to figure out how can I have it all like I was told I was supposed to. And quilting and working directly with fabric was soothing for me to feel like I'm still making something, I'm still making artwork, and this is something that I can manage, I can fold it up. And now my daughter, who's a toddler, is not going to open one of these tubes and eat it. So that's it.
I love all of what you said, and quilting has had its healing properties for me as well. How I originally got to it was a dream of my grandmother. She was in front of this house. I'm gonna abbreviate this dream, but skip ahead to the end. I noticed that it's her in front of this 2-story row house, and it's flaxen light flowing out of her body, waves of gold energy piercing me, right? And I notice it's her, and then I notice that the whole house is wrapped in a quilt. And, theme of my life, I call my mom, and I'm like, I figured it out. I'm supposed to be making quilts. This is so funny because just a few weeks ago, she's talking with a collector friend of mine that's my parents' age, and I'm hearing these stories that I had never heard, conversations my parents were having. They thought I lost my mind when I said I was gonna start quilting. They thought this, hey, we spent all this money on school, he studies painting, gets out of school, does one show, decides he wants to throw all that out the window and start making quilts. But it really did heal me in ways that, I'm just so a lot of this work is prayers of thanksgiving because, I had gone through a lot of time here being a very instant gratification type person, feeling like there was some gap to fill, feeling this pressure, everything has to be done so fast and get done right now, and I have to be, and all this pressure to just, maybe it's the United States, pressure to you can't be poor, you can't get a girlfriend if you're poor, and you can't, all this stuff, right? But quilting taught me real patience, and it taught me delayed gratification. And when the quilts got big and I realized it was too weak, it taught me to get in the gym. And that helped me heal my, depression and anxiety. And so quilting was this thing that really rewired the landscape of my mind and like made it where I can be this version and whatever version will become next. I like this version better than before. So that's how I got to quilting, and what quilting has kind of done for me in an emotional capacity. Just really helped me experience myself in a way that I enjoy more than I have been before.
Great, thank you. I wanted to talk about your process, each of your process. So, like we said, you hadn't started out making quilts. You came from a painting background. Drawing is really at the core of your practice, Basil. So I would love to just kind of walk us through what your process looks like. Maybe we'll start with you, Bisa. You're working from found photographs, either from a family archive or from a national archive, and then kind of translating that through textile. Right. And I wanted to just call out this amazingly painterly quality to the skin that you render and the faces especially. And yeah, just kind of talk us through how you do this.
Yes. Wait, first.
Oh.
And I was like, I'm gonna get through this.
Yeah. No. You did good. You did good. You're doing great, sweetie. My process is that I'm in love with the stories of what happened before us. And I know that many of you saw this photo when it was, I'm going to say found, but obviously somebody had it all along. And I suppose that somebody decided to make it public around 2020. A friend of ours, Rhea Combs from the National Portrait Gallery, the chief curator there, was responsible for bringing this photo to life. And it's so fascinating. Like, I know for me, I had never seen Harriet Tubman young, ever. And around the time when this photo was taken, she's about 45, and I was 45. And it really made me question myself. We were in the mid-pandemic. We were all trapped inside. It made me think about my life. Like, what are you even doing? If she's 45 and she's taking this photo, she's already free. She's already helped so many people get free. And she's super fly. Like, come on now. The waves in the hair. You know, we're used to seeing the elder Harriet, but who knew that Harriet had that teeny tiny waist? Speaking of working out, I was like, hold up, I mean, get some crunches in. But I look at a photo and that's what inspires me. And then I draw on top of a black and white version of the photo just to separate the value scale, light to dark. And then, let me see the Hellfighters. Let's see, is it this? And then this original. Yeah, the original. So images like this, you know, who are these men? What are they doing there? Why are they so fine? Yeah. And then I'm like a cultural anthropologist trying to figure out the secret to the fineness. How? And their names that they gave the photographer, Private Eagle Eye, Ed Williams, Lamplight, Herbert Taylor, Kid Buck, Kid Hawk, Sergeant Storms. Like, really? And the one who is kind of hunkering down in the middle, that's the Sergeant Dan Storms. And talk about a man's man. The fact that more I looked at this photo, the more it was fascinating. They're on a ship coming in from Europe. The white soldiers had already gotten their ticker tape parade when they left the United States to go fight. This unit, the Harlem Hellfighters in the First World War, the 369th Regiment, were the longest serving unit of all the units who went over to fight. they fought bravely. They had the highest number of casualties. And when you see World War I movies, you never see these guys. So it's the curiosity. I'll make a sketch, and then I start thinking about who are they, who's the funny guy, who's the leader, who's the serious one. And then I included these detail shots so you could see their personalities. One of these men, the one who's sort of like shades of orange and red, one of my good friends calls him her boyfriend. Maybe he was like that, maybe he wasn't, but I'm trying to suss out who they are, and I'm choosing the colors related to the emotion. The other young man, he was known as Lamplight. I don't know what that means, but he had a very intense, like it looked like he was about to jump up at any moment. And I often use dual colors, like red and white, the hot and the cool, because somebody like that, he's got to be cool, he has to be quiet, but don't cross him. Yeah. So then you see the red side. And I'm using color to define him, and I'm also using fabrics to define them. So you'll see things like some of the fabrics, that swirl pattern on the arm is the circle of life. On one young man, you'll see something that kind of looks like a Chinese dragon. We don't have a pointer, do we? But on his knee that's popped out, you see like some kind of brown thing. It's a lion, but that fabric in Africa means I sit by the gates. So I'm the guardian. And I'm using these fabrics to tell a story. So I'm looking at them, I'm looking at who they might have been, and then I'm trying to tell a story of who I think they were.
I want to point out one thing about this piece too. So this, maybe you can see my shadow. This pattern right here was used in the Underground Railroad. It's the bow tie, and it signified that somebody was going to bring you new clothes for the next leg of the journey. And I love how you like give them their new clothes, you know, give them this new life. And then you see it again on that left sleeve over there. This one here is the pinwheel, and I kind of made up my own. Like, I think that this one reminds me of like the playfulness of childhood, which is also a good fit with like this, like they lived these hard lives, but these guys are still young. Like, these guys are still basically kids, you know, so. But, okay, remind me of the question.
Yeah. Can you talk about your process? Because it's really rooted in drawing. You even called drawing your kind of home base, and you start your day off drawing, sketching. It's where you record all of your kind of subject matter, your emotions, your feelings. So yeah, walk us through how you go from a drawing to a textile.
So, everything starts with drawing. I've often said, and I'll repeat it here, that for me, drawing is like dreaming. I don't plan. I draw extemporaneously and see what happens. And so as I start drawing, the image emerges on its own. From there, it's a deduction process of what is my spirit trying to tell me. And so, you know, if I'm being truthful, I wake up, I play like 20 minutes of Super Nintendo, get my brain fired up, Tetris Attack preferred. That'll really get your juices flowing. And then, after doing a little cardio, I'll start to draw, because like both of those things back to back, the video games and the exercise, is designed to get my brain in the state where I can make art without second guessing it. My neurons are flying. I can just play. And so that's what I'll do. I'll play for probably the first hour or 48 minutes and take a break and kind of see what happened. After you do this enough, you'll end up with like a big library of drawings to choose from. And when I go to make one of the quilts, I'll look at like, you know, this is a technique I kind of took from the Baroque artists. I'll look at all these different drawings and pick my favorite parts and then kind of make a composite in my mind of, oh, I like this gesture, I like how those toes were curling, I like how this arm did this or that, or this angle or this or that. And so when I get to the point where I'm drawing the framework for this, you know, I just put the fabric on the wall and draw it in big sheets. And so this drawing actually came after I had already started the big piece. Like these drawings beneath, I had done all these different practice gestures because I had done an earlier drawing of these figures waist deep in water. And so as I'm going back and forth, this drawing emerged where I was like, okay, this is going to be my guide. But it's not like I started with this and copied it to make that. Like, drawing is part of it, but a lot of the time, like, the way my practice is now, I kind of don't start one piece and finish it, and then start another piece and finish it. Like, I'm constantly collecting materials, I'm constantly gathering inspiration, doing these preparatory sketches for pieces that may or may not ever be made, and then when I get my fabrics together, like I'll pick out a set of fabrics. Once I get them together, I put them on the wall, I draw it in chalk, and then I hand cut it, and we hand sew the first part, you know, and then we mix in some embroidery, and that's Rhoda, my studio manager. Yeah, so, you know, it starts all very playfully, and I think that's a big, important thing for me, is I tried, because they tell you, have an idea, make the idea, talk about the thing that you made. I tried to do it the way that they tell you in school, and that didn't work for me. I had to just make stuff and let my spirit and God tell me what's happening. Like, I don't necessarily have to be in control. For me to make my best art is more often a process of surrender, being supple to what's happening in the stew of the situation. And then now, as my practice has grown, I'm able to, you know, delegate different parts of the process so that we can experiment with more ideas, which lets the, you know, work grow at its different pace, you know, just like a tree that's branching out. But yeah, that's the process. Normally drawing, then I'll like, you know, we'll pull out, they get annoyed at me sometimes because I'll stop everybody from what they're doing. We'll pull out all the fabrics. So like, imagine, you know, I have to see it. I have like ADD, so I have to see everything. You know, we'll pull out everything. I'll pick out 5 or 6 fabrics, and then I'm like, okay, we got to fold all this stuff up and put it back. And it's like 10 of us folding fabrics and putting them up. Yeah, and then I love, like in the beginning, when I started making these figurative pieces, I was so nervous to mess up the material. I'd make a template, blow it up, print it out on some flexible material, trace it. I was like, this is now boring. And so I was like, I just got to freestyle. So now, put the fabric up and just draw it in chalk. And I noticed that when I use my whole body, the lines come out real dramatic and like way more fun. And the risk of messing it all up makes it way more fun. Like, I think, you know, I'm getting on a little tangent, but I do think that for fun to be had, you have to have the threat of frustration or failure. And it's facing it and coming out on top that makes it exhilarating. So I like that's why I don't really copy. Like, I mean, I did when I was learning, and I still will sometimes secretly copy. Like, I did a secret copy of a Shintaro Kago drawing because I'm like, how did he do that? But I don't copy my own drawing to make the quilt. I will copy things for study purposes, but.
Thank you. Yeah. Since we have this image up, maybe we can just chat briefly about your studio practice, each of you, which from what I gather feels fairly different. Basil, you're often in Ghana working with a studio of, you know, multiple members that are helping you. They're experts in whatever craft they happen to know, and maybe it's passed down generations. So you're kind of relying on their expertise, creating community in that way. And then Bisa, it seems like you're working a little bit more independently, your hands kind of in most of the work that you're making. So I'd love to just hear, especially about kind of improvisation too that you were just mentioning, Basil. And Bisa, sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent, but maybe that'll lead toward what your new kind of shift is that I learned about last night with, yeah.
So for me, as soon as I started quilting, I was thinking about these core themes, and nobody was really making quilts all by themselves. Like even my grandma, I remember her getting together with her buddies, having the kids thread some needles because we had good eyes, and you know, you might make your top by yourself, but they would get together and help each other with the finishing. Angie had come in the beginning and volunteered to help me make stuff. So many people in this room, Renee, Sarita, so many people in this room have come and volunteered to help me make stuff because I couldn't make it all by myself. And I don't know why I always wanted to make these big quilts. Well, that's a lie. That dream. My first idea, I didn't know I would do all these shows and that it would go this way. My first goal was to wrap a house in a quilt. So I was like, come help me put all this quilt together because I need X amount of square feet of quilt to wrap this house in a quilt. And then all this stuff has happened along the way. That house is going to get wrapped, but all that to say, my quilting practice had always been more than just me. And that was a major life lesson at the time that it happened because I was so hyper vigilant on this idea that like I had to do this stuff myself, like especially with the other types of art that I was making. I would be isolating myself, like basically like, not intentionally, but like, huffing paint thinner while you paint in this dark little corner. And the quilting really opened me up. And so now it got to the point where, Rhoda and I had always maintained our friendship. We met coming up on 11 years ago, like 10 years ago. And she had been, watching the trajectory of my work, and she was like, you're going to run out of steam. She was like, you need to come over here to Ghana and let me help you make this art because if you keep getting these big opportunities, how are you going to make all that stuff on your own? And I was like, that's a real good point, And so that was like another moment of surrender where it was like, if I do want to keep going, I need help. Otherwise, a lot of businesses don't fail because they don't get enough customers. A lot of businesses fail because they can't meet demand. And so that was a point at which I had to realize that, like, for me, it's more important to have the best result than for me to do it all by myself and get all the credit. Like, I would rather share the credit, share the money, share all the different things and have a better end result than, me say, I did that all by myself. Look at how sweet it is, So, but yeah, so in the studio, like while I'm away, me and Rhoda talk every morning because I'll have different people working on different things even while I'm away, preparing for when I get back so that when I get there, I do the part that only I can do. And then, I'm always drawing on my own. The guys that I work with the embroidery, at first I had hired this guy to teach me how to do it. And then I pretty quickly realized that was dumb because, I'd be 70 before I was as good as he was at doing it, and came to this process that to me is a really, I really like the nature of my embroidery process because it flips the notion of 14th, 15th, 16th century tapestry making, where the cartoons would be drawn in Italy or France, and then the tapestries would be woven and executed in the Netherlands. This, I get to draw in St. Louis, and I work with these generational embroiderers, guys whose dads and granddads did this form of embroidery. And we've created, to me, a new art form that's, truly African American. It's American and it's African. Like, so often I feel like that term is used inappropriately and incorrect. Like, just I mean, the way it's used, it's not even like that's not even like how English really works. But I got fascinated with the idea of making looking at that term and then making something that was accurately African and American. And I really like the way that it's come out. And that was another moment where I realized, like, let everybody do what they do best. Like, I can draw in a way that only I can draw. and I can plan and vision things in a way that only I can do. And these guys can use that machine like it's a wizard's wand, like, you know. And so that's just been a really cool way for me to realize like some of the deeper nature of art, the truth of art beyond the Western canon. Like, the Western world has made magic into a commodity, when to me, and the main thrust of my work is learning how to understand and use this spiritual technology. Like, this is real technology that's in us. You know, it's like we all have our own different powers, but we're taught to think that we're like normal. And I'm unlocking my powers, you know.
And although our practices are different, they're very much the same. Like, quilting is a communal activity, the quilt circle. You know, painters, they work usually solo, you know, in the studio, spend a lot of hours by themselves. Well, quilters traditionally would be talking, gossiping, singing, feeding each other. And when I went to the quilt world, I suddenly had a community that I didn't have as a painter. And also the quilters most of them tended to be older than me at the time, not anymore, but before. And so I had this loving embrace of women women and a few men that I could look towards for influence. And now, while most of my quilt work is done alone, because I'm working on these portraits that I'm a control freak too, so everything Basil is saying, I'm listening like, yes, listen to this, take it in. But the way that I do get help is we have a family affair. My youngest daughter does my social media. She's an art student at Pratt. I know, she's good. My TikTok, like, I don't even know how to log into TikTok. Come on. And so she keeps me up on things. Our oldest daughter is getting her MBA at UPenn. So she's always telling me what I need to invest in and where I need to put my money and what I should be doing. So I have these managers. They're 24 and 28, so. And then my husband, John, who is here, raise your hands. Stand up and introduce yourself. I'm kidding. Tell them what you majored in. And John is helping me big time because I am producing my first silk screens. And I started as a painter and I love to draw, but do I do that anymore? Not really in a meaningful way. And being able to work with a printmaker where he can take one of my existing images, let me see. He can take something that I've done already. All right, let's just say this image based on the great Gordon Parks, his photography. But a printmaker can scan my piece and make that in 60 different colors, which is what he did. Flipping the colors each time, try gold, try silver, try aqua, try purple. I could never do that. I make that one quilt, took me 2 months to make it, and that's it. There's no variations, and it's very specific because I worked on it for so long. And so being able to have this whole other branch, it's my husband who often has to make those decisions because I'm so sucked into this deep dive of getting this original color the way I want it to be. I relinquish that control that you use with your staff to my family members. Like, you know me, I trust you, and I trust that you're going to make the right decisions. And so I'm excited about being able to branch out in another way and me being able to accept help from those around me in another way.
Lovely, thank you. Gosh, we're coming up on the hour already. Time is just flying by. So I'm going to stop asking my questions and open it up to the audience. We have a mic runner, Grace, over here. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We can hopefully get to 2 or 3 questions.
Both talked about how in Ghana there's a lot of men who are involved in the sewing, not so much in the US. Do you have any visions for how here you can start to bring men into the fold?
That's a good question. I mean, if there's any guys that want to come and help me, I'll teach you how to sew. It's easy and it's fun. Yeah. I mean, I think by nature of the way we are conditioned here, I mean, hopefully, I think it's just a matter of people being exposed to more things. Like, if all you see is one thing, that's kind of all you know. That's how we develop all of our different ignorances. So, I think just by existing and doing what I'm doing, hopefully that can encourage, the next fellow to pick up his sewing tools. Yeah, John sews. I do eventually, when the time is right, want to build some sort of something that makes it where I can engage more of the youth and have a space where people can come and create things and learn and participate, But I think things happen naturally, and what I've been trusting and what's happened in my life and career so far is that, the people that are moved by what I do tend to end up being gravitated to me. And if, I would love to see more men sew, because I think I know for a fact it would help with a lot of our emotional issues. So that would be beneficial. But
Can I ask my question now? Back here. My question is about, most of the time people think of quilting, it started as a necessity. And since when an art form starts out as a necessity, does you think that... Hello. Yeah. So when quilting starts out as a necessity most of the time, how do you think that makes it a wonderful medium for creativity? Because a lot of stuff, like we think of cooking, nobody really thought of cooking as culinary arts, and it eventually evolved into that. So why do you think quilting is like the ultimate medium for creativity?
Okay, let me take a 2-sentence stab, and then I'll let you, 'cause that's a good question. You can get a piece of that one too. So I sleep with the quilt that I made, and I feel like even though these quilts have lost their traditional function, they now serve this kind of emotional function. I feel like quilting, you can never fully remove the functionality from the object. So for me, why it's the ultimate medium is because of its materiality. Every material has an emotional load, some sort of memorial content, something that boosts its energetic quality. I mentioned that quilt that I sleep with because when I sleep with that quilt, I dream more, I sleep deeper, I toss and turn less, I wake up less in the middle of the night. So it has tangible properties. The sad thing about this conversation around utility is often when there's utility attached to an object, that's used to diminish its value, especially when it came to things that were traditionally done by women or black women. And so I think part of this is this reminder to all of us about the power of these objects. Like, I still will collect the handmade quilts that I see at the resale shops and consignment shops, because I'm like, this is a magical instrument that will lead to a higher quality of life for me. Like, on my couch, I don't know all of these women, but these are quilts that somebody made by hand. You know, there's no polyfibers, there's no, you know, weird stuff. And every one of those hand stitches boosted its power. And so for me, when I shifted from traditional art making materials to, I'm going to redo that sentence because fiber is a traditional art making material. When I stopped buying stuff at the art supply store and started using things from real life, I noticed the impact just even on myself in the process, like touching the materials, wondering about their story, feeling the different textures. It's like I could play with paint, but it didn't have the same emotional impact of the material. Now, the finished piece, you can make some emotional paintings, but the process for me, the fact that I could amplify my lived experience with the thing in a tangible way, those things made it, you know, irresistible to me, where I couldn't stop.
And I agree when you're talking about the tangibility and what fabric can do for you. And I think that's why people respond to both of our works, because anybody can look at them and understand them. You know what velvet is, you know what wool is. You don't feel like this is something you don't have a right to talk about or judge. And so that barrier is not there. You're familiar with it. And then traditionally, a quilt is something that you would use and touch. So you're responding to it. You don't have to touch the velvet to know what it feels like. So I think a quilt has a way of healing us and the people who are looking at it, because unless you grew up in an art family and art circles, maybe you unconsciously, when you enter certain spaces, feel like, well, I don't know art and I didn't study art, so I shouldn't say. But you do feel like you can say it about a quilt.
I like that point. That's a really good point.
Yes.
This question is mostly for Basil. Basil, I remember when you made book bags, like these awesome backpacks. And at that time, that was your power object. Can you talk to us about how you transition your relationships with what you consider the power object to be as it changes in your art practice?
That's a really good question. I'm so glad you remember like the early work. Like people that remember the stuff that I was making before, you know, anybody really knew about my art. But yeah, so for the people that didn't know, I would collect old books and stack them up, hollow them out, and make book bags that were like, you know, backpack, but it was a book bag, you know. And those, you know, maybe the idea was around like hiding things in plain sight and like, you know, discretion and whatnot. I think these different objects kind of, and it goes to that point about necessity, the different objects emerge out of a sort of emotional necessity. And I think use charges the objects too. And so now I've been noticing that like, as far as power objects, I have a few certain t-shirts that like, this is one, my friend Noel made me this one. I have a few different shirts, like if I'm about to lift something real heavy in the gym, I'll wear this one particular shirt. Like if I need to do a bunch of reps, I'll wear this one, like, you know, Rock Lee t-shirt. So it's, for me, the idea of the power object has been expanding to how do I concentrate my energy in these few certain things? And that's led me to like mending more and like, you know, kind of keeping the life alive in the things that I do find special, rather than like, oh, that went bad, I need to now get a new thing. It's like you reset its power meter if you get rid of it. So, and to your point about how do I shift and transition through things, I don't really think about it so much. I more just observe. Like I notice, like a big part of my art practice, my dad says this thing, dial back to zero, notice and be. And he'll also say this thing like, be in the third person. And so like I observe my curiosities and then say, okay, where is this leading me? Why am I interested in this? What is it trying to say? And so, you know, rather than me choosing a transition, I'm more just like floating down the stream and trying to like stay in the good part of the current rather than like trying to resist it or something like that. So I think each different thing has its time and its place, and some things persist and some things were good when they were, why they were for that time. And it's interesting to see what sticks. I hope that answered your question. Okay.
I think we have time for one more question. One or two, yeah.
Hey, you said a lot of stuff about your process. One thing that I don't think gets mentioned is the state of flow. You mentioned a sense of surrender, video games and cardio, substances such as paint thinner, any other habits or substances, as long as there's no narcs, you want to mention?
Sleep. So to me, sleep is the most important factor in this whole operation. And when I decided to prioritize my sleep life, I gotta point out Sarita, she's the master of sleep life. She gets to bed at like 9 o'clock. It really made a dramatic impact on my creativity, my just mood and emotional state. I will say, I'm off the paint thinner. No, that was a joke. But I also cannot understate the importance of exercise and like eating real food. And all this sounds basic, but what I realized is that for me to make my best art, I really had to just dial it in on the fundamentals. Like, get a good night's sleep. Why do you get a good night's sleep? Because you care about the next day. Why do you care about the next day? Because I care about myself. Like, a lot of this stuff had to do with my process of learning how to care about myself. And so I think a good night's sleep is the first key discipline. That'll unlock a lot of stuff. You said there's one more? Yeah.
Oh, hi. Thank you for your time. My question was, the fabric choices seem very intentional, and I'm curious whether or not you reuse them, and if so, when you reuse them, do they connect to different pieces? Is there like a narrative through line throughout them?
Yes. So that's a very good intuition on your part. I do reuse things, and as I reuse them, they begin to take on different, roles within the world that I'm building. So like that black kente with the embroidered symbols, you'll see a red one and a gold one in that other quilt. That's a material that I've used in a number of my pieces, and it kind of, for me, has begun to symbolize our spirit body. So like we have this physical body that's operating, and at the same time our spirit body is operating. And so even though, with these eyes you don't have sight of it, like the activities of your spirit body are still going on, like even now. Like and so like that particular, black with the very different color embroidery has taken on that role. Some of these things are just like obsessions. Like one of my favorite outfits as a kid, I had this pair of green overalls. They were corduroy. And so now I'm just obsessed with, I've always had this affinity for corduroy. So you see corduroy in a lot of my quilts. And then some of this stuff is just like, when you're in the market, it's just like a oversaturation of energy and color and materials. And so, sometimes I can't even look at everything because there's so much cool stuff. And so it is just like noticing what I'm drawn to and then letting its meaning unfold as I keep using it. So like, I may use these, you'll notice that blue patchwork that's used as like a aura type situation here. Like if you go to the purple one, I don't know how to fiddle with this thing. There you go. I used it as the body of this figure here. And so some of this stuff, to me, it's like how our energy can change over time. Like you'll see these like super spirit beings. They have a quilt of that kente, and that was like leftover material from my Rubel quilts for those two like three-headed figures that are embracing each other like this. So I like reusing materials. I like seeing things in multiple ways. That's a big theme in a lot of my work. You'll see why I draw stuff with like a bunch of different eyes, is to signify the ability to see things in a multitude of ways and like, you know, have sight into different parts of our reality. So yeah, and then like the fireflies, that's the bathing sponge. I had bathed with that for a while before, like to soften it up. So like, I'm big on reusing my scraps.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for this very generous and inspirational conversation. I know we could just go on and on all night, but I want to respect each other's time and just say thank you so much for being here, Bisa and Basil. And thanks everyone also for joining.